Welcome to Asbury Free Methodist Church in Perth, Ontario, the online edition. Thanks for joining with us. Our goal is to help you come into a relationship with God through His Son, Jesus Christ, so that you can become all that you are created to be. And now, here's our pastor, Brent Russet.
Hi friends, and welcome to Asbury Online. My name is Brent Russet, and I am the pastor of Asbury Free Methodist Church in beautiful Perth, Ontario, Canada. And I'm so glad that you've chosen to join in today and hear God's Word, and I believe that it's going to inspire faith, it's going to encourage your relationship with Christ, it's going to speak into where you're at right now. As you may notice, I am coming to you from a different place. I'm coming to you from my home. Reason for that is that I came down with what I believe to be a cold. I have a cough and I had a runny nose. And so in this time of COVID, when you have a cough and a runny nose, you don't go out into public and you go get tested. I've gone tested. I'm just waiting for the results. I expect them to be negative. But in the meantime, I'm not going into the church. And so that's why you see me in a different setting today. Well, we've been looking at the book of John and the I am statements of Jesus. I am the light of the world. I am the good shepherd. I am the resurrection and the life. And these I am statements tell us about who Jesus is and about who he wants to be for us. This morning we're going to look at the statement found in John chapter 14, verse 6. It says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. In some ways, this is a summary statement of what Jesus has been saying about himself. When he says, I am the way, it's kind of like him saying, I am the good shepherd. I'm the one that you need to follow and that you can trust. When he says, I am the truth, we looked at when he said, I am the light of the world. And truth and light in the book of John are really connected. And he's saying, I am what will bring you into truth. And when he says, I am the life, it's kind of like what we looked at last week when he said, I am the resurrection and the life. And so this is kind of a summary statement of where we've been. You know, we live in uncertain times. COVID has been booming in the U.S. and the numbers are kind of growing around here. And we wonder, well, what's the future going to be like? Are we going to see a second wave? And on top of that, there's this tribalism, this alt-right racism, and then there's this protests, and some of the protests are wonderful because we need to speak up and say racism is absolutely wrong. And yet some people have been using these protests as a cover for violence, and that's wrong too. We've seen the police use brutality tactics, and yet we know that there's a number of great police officers, and we see all these tensions around, and then we take a look into the future and we wonder, okay, well, what's going to happen? How's our economy going to perform? We take a look at the stock market and we say, okay, it's near all-time highs, and yet it seems to be psychologically driven rather than numbers driven. And as we take a look at these things, the future feels ominous. And if you can relate to that feeling, then you can relate to where the disciples are coming from. Because as we get to John chapter 14 here, what's been going on is that, well, Jesus has said that Judas is going to betray him. And Judas has left the room. And Jesus says that before breakfast tomorrow, Peter's going to deny him 3 times. And on top of that, he says that, well, I'm going to be going away, and where I'm going, you cannot follow. And the disciples are sitting at this Last Supper, and they're staggered. They just have this ominous feeling about what's going on in the world, and they're just wondering what's going to happen to us. And this is where we pick up the story. John chapter 14, verse 1 says, Jesus says, do not let your hearts be troubled. Trust in God, trust also in me. Do not let your hearts be troubled. Trust in God, trust also in me. Okay, Jesus, one of us is going to betray you, another of us is going to deny you, and you are going away and we can't follow you? And you come along and you say, don't let your hearts be troubled? You know, sometimes Jesus asks a lot of his followers. Jesus said that in the world you will have trouble, but take heart, I've overcome the world. And he says, well, here he says, don't let your hearts be troubled. Here's what you need to know. Your hearts the state of your heart does not need to reflect your circumstances. Your heart does not need to reflect your circumstances. But there's only one way to get there. And Jesus tells us that way. He says, trust in God, trust also in me. When my levels of stress are unhealthily high, I know I'm not trusting. When my worry and my anxiety are getting the better of me, I know I'm not trusting. And it's helpful for me to remember that my heart does not need to reflect my circumstances. My circumstances may be uncertain, they may be challenging, they may be difficult, the future may look ominous, but Jesus comes along and says to you, don't let your hearts be troubled. Trust in God, trust also in me. You know, COVID is real, but don't let your heart be troubled. Social unrest is real, but don't let your hearts be troubled. Financial difficulties are real, but don't let your hearts be troubled. Then Jesus goes on to say this to the disciples, verse 2. There's more than enough room in my Father's home. If it were not so, would I have told you that I'm going to prepare a place for you? When everything is ready, I will come and get you, so that you will always be where I am. Now, I know the tendency when we read this is we think, well, Jesus grew up as a carpenter's son, and he was probably trained in as being a carpenter. And when he says, I'm going to prepare a place for you, we imagine him going up into heaven and building us some architectural wonder. And the King James Version doesn't really help us because it translates this as mansions. I'm going to be building mansions for you. That's not a good translation of this verse, but we have this sense, and ever since that, we've been arguing, well, what kind of architecture is there going to be in heaven? And if you're going to get to what Jesus is really talking about here, you need to take these verses less literally. He's talking about taking you into the domain of God. He's talking about a way where you can live where God is. He's not talking about a physical realm here. He's talking about taking you into the spiritual realm. And so when he's talking about, I'm going to prepare a place for you, he is talking about his death, and he is talking about his resurrection. He's saying that I'm going to prepare a place for you. I'm going to prepare a place where you can move into the domain of God. That you can move into a spiritual reality that will encompass your whole life. That you may be where I am always. Jesus goes on to say in verse 3, when everything is ready, I'll come and get you so that you will be with me always where I am. You know the way to where I'm going. And verse 5, no, we don't, Lord, Thomas said. We have no idea where you are going, so how can we know the way? Now, Jesus had already told them where he was going. He was going to the Father, and he was going to prepare a way for them to go to the Father as well. But the disciples were taking this literally. They were not thinking about the spiritual realm, they were thinking the physical realm. And so that's why Thomas goes on to say, well, in verse 8, Philip said, Lord, show us the Father and we will be satisfied. You know, Jesus, show us this Father you've been talking about. Show us, tell us how to get to him. draw us a map, because we don't know the way. Do we go out the eastern gate? Do we head to Damascus? Do we go to the sycamore tree and turn right? Draw us a map, and we'll go see the Father. Show us the way. Philip, you're thinking about things in a physical way, but Jesus is saying, I'm talking about the spiritual realm. I'm talking about a different realm than the way you're thinking. And so, whenever you mix up the physical realm with the spiritual realm, things get a little wonky. And that's why it's important that you understand that Jesus is talking about the spiritual realm, because when you get to verse 6, here's what Jesus says. Jesus told him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. He's not talking about a literal pathway. Jesus is not talking about a dogmatic, premise-based truth. Jesus is not talking about life that you can measure on a medical monitor. He's talking about a spiritual reality that all of us must come to terms with. When he says he's the way to the Father, it's a spiritual pathway that he's describing. But whenever we talk about spiritual realities, we have to talk about them in metaphor, and we could compare what we know to spiritual realities that we don't know. And that's what Jesus is doing here when he says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. He's talking about a spiritual reality, but he's putting it in terms that we might be able to understand. So when Jesus says, I'm the way, we could picture him as a pathway that leads to God. Or we could picture Jesus as a map that tells us how to get to God. We could picture him as a bridge that we cross in order to get to God. We could picture him as a leader, and like Moses, he leads us out of slavery and into the promised land. And all these ways of picturing Jesus are appropriate in their own way, but they're really limited in scope. Jesus is saying so much more than that. He's saying so much more when he says, I'm the way to the Father. Come with me to John chapter 14, verse 8. Philip said, Lord, show us the Father, and I'll be satisfied. Jesus replied, have you been with me all this time, Philip, and you still don't know who I am? Anyone who's seen me has seen the Father. So why are you asking me to show him to you? Don't you believe that I am in the Father and the Father is in me? The words I speak are not my own, but my Father's who lives in me and does his work through me. Just believe that I'm in the Father and that the Father is in me. Or at least believe because of the work you have seen me do. Remember, he says, I'm the way to the Father. And then he says, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. And I'm going to the Father. And I am in the Father. And the Father is in me. In a few moments, he's going to talk about the Holy Spirit. But come with me to verse 20. Jesus expands what he means when he says the Father and he are one. Verse 20 says, when I am raised to life again, so after the resurrection, you will know that I am in my Father, and you are in me, and I am in you. After the resurrection, when I'm raised to life again, you will know that I am in my Father, and you are in me, and I am in you. That's verse 20. There's something really profound going on here. I know that the idea of the Trinity is really confusing. How can 3 be 1 and 1 be 3? And I know the addition doesn't add up, and I know that there's a mystery that God is 3 and yet 1 in essence, and there's only one God. But if you can suspend your lack of understanding of the Trinity for a moment and just hear what Jesus is saying. He's saying, Jesus says, I'm in my Father. I'm part of that divine reality. But more than that, not only am I in my Father, and my Father and I one, not only am I in him, but he says in verse 20, you are in me. And he says that my spirit is in you. You are in me, and I am in you, and I'm in the Father. I'm the way to the Father. To be clear, Jesus is not saying that we are gods. He is saying that we are people who can enter into the life of God. If I can use a weak illustration, sometimes the Trinity is represented by 3 circles. And these overlapping circles represent the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. They are 3, and yet they overlap into 1. It's not an ideal representation of the Trinity, but because the totality of the Godhead cannot be drawn on paper. But if we use this less than ideal picture, what Jesus is saying is, I'm in the Father, and you are in me. And so you are in me, and I am in the Father. I'm in the heart of the Trinity. You're invited into my life. I am in you. You don't become God, but you enter into this awesome, mysterious relationship with God. Jesus says, I'm the truth. I'm not a list of theological statements. He's saying, I embody who God is. So living in the truth means living in relationship with Jesus in a way that is consistent with who Jesus is. And when we do that, Jesus says, you'll know the truth, and the truth will set you free. And being in the Trinity, you're surrounded by the author of life, the one who is life, the one who is full of life. Jesus says, I am life, and I am inviting you into this life so that you can be surrounded with and filled with my life. A life that is overflowing and flourishing and springing up. A life that is there and where you are loved and you're full of love. Jesus says, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. I'm in you. You're in me. I'm in the Father. I'm inviting you into the life of God. We live in uncertain times, and we may face uncertain futures. But Jesus comes along and he says, don't let your hearts be troubled. Trust in God. Trust also in me. I've got this. I'm the way to the Father, and as you walk in relationship with God, you'll know that God is there with you and for you. That doesn't mean you won't have to go through hard times. In this world we will have trouble. But take heart, Jesus has overcome the world. In these times of trouble, your heart does not need to reflect your circumstances. If you're going through difficult circumstances, your heart can still be healthy and full and overflowing because of who you are and where you are and the relationship with God that Jesus has invited you into. I want to tell you that Jesus wants the very, very best for you. He loves you so much, so he goes to prepare a place for you by dying and rising again and inviting you into this incredible relationship. If you've never given your heart to Jesus, I would encourage you to do that. Just pray a simple prayer and say, Lord, come into my life. I want you in me, and I want to be in you. Forgive me of my sin and help me to walk with you. Because you are the way, you are the truth, you are the life. I acknowledge that. If you've given your life to Jesus, he invites you deeper into who he is, right into the heart of the Godhead, so that you can be surrounded with the life that is really life. I would encourage you, don't let your heart be troubled. Trust in God. Trust Jesus. He's there. He's made a relationship, and he cares for you. Blessings on you, and have a wonderful week. Go in peace.